Hey guys, Mike here, and welcome to another episode of Dragon Ball Plot Holes and Inconsistencies, a show where we talk about the plot holes and inconsistencies in the Dragon Ball anime and manga. The plot hole we're going to deal with in this episode has to do with Cell, or more specifically, his time travel to the past and when exactly he arrived there. Now, as we all know, Cell is a biological android from the future, created by Dr. Gero along with the other androids. Created to be the perfect organism, Cell was comprised of the different cells of the Z-Fighters and villains that they fought on Earth throughout time. This gave him full access to a host of different techniques used by the Z-Fighters and those villains. However, in order to attain his perfect transformation, Cell required the other androids, 17 and 18, to absorb them into his being. Unfortunately for Cell, due to the fact that his creation process took so long, by the time that he awoke in the future ravaged by the androids, Trunks had already found a way to destroy them. However, Cell quickly discovered that Trunks possessed a time machine, and after killing Trunks, stole the time machine and went back to the main timeline so that he could find the androids and absorb them. Once there, and after evolving beyond his larval state, Cell encountered Piccolo. After a fight between the two, Piccolo lulled Cell into a false sense of security, during which he convinced Cell to tell him all about where he came from and what his plans were for the Earth. It is during this conversation that our plot hole arises and makes us question Cell's involvement in the entire saga, as well as how he even got there to begin with. During this conversation, Cell reveals how he killed Trunks and stole the time machine, going back in time to 4 years before the androids appeared. During the course of this, Cell had to regress into his larval state because otherwise he wouldn't have been able to fit in the time machine. And so Cell, being similar to a cicada, had to burrow deep underground and regain enough strength where he could turn back into his imperfect form. In this case, the plot hole in question arises once Piccolo asks Cell how he knew how to use the time machine and why he went to that year specifically. At this point, Cell tells Piccolo that Trunks had already set up the time machine to go to that time, and so Cell only had to press the button to activate it. Piccolo then theorized that Trunks was planning to come back in time to tell them how he destroyed the androids. However, none of this actually makes sense considering what was just said. As Cell had said, he came back 4 years before the androids appeared, and as Trunks said when he found Cell's time machine, this was 1 year before he originally came back. So the problem here is that if Trunks went back 4 years before the androids came, he would be going back in time before he ever even met the Z-Fighters. And Trunks' arrival would take place during the period of time before Goku even arrived from Yardrat. So it wouldn't make any sense for Trunks to come back to this point in time, because he would have to wait 4 years before he could actually talk to the Z-Fighters to tell them about how he defeated the androids. And if Trunks actually did talk to the Z-Fighters at this point, it would change history and create an entirely different timeline from the one that he had already visited, just as Cell did when he came. So going by everything I just said, it makes no sense for Trunks to have ever come to that point in time, because it would completely undermine his entire purpose of returning to the past. And as a result, and because no other explanation is ever given, this must be a plot hole. Time travel scenarios can be very tricky and almost always have plot holes involved in their stories. So Toriyama making this kind of mistake is not exactly unprecedented, but I think I have a possible theory to explain why Toriyama made this mistake to begin with. As Cell explained in the same conversation, it takes him a long time to regain his imperfect form after regressing into his larval state. And after burying himself underground, it likely took the whole of the 4 years for him to actually return to his imperfect state. In fact, the manga confirms this because when Gohan and Trunks actually find the remaining shed skin of the larval form, Trunks puts his hand inside and finds that it's still wet, so it's very likely that he had just shed that skin before he went to Ginger Town and met Piccolo. So what I think is possible is that when Akira Toriyama was originally writing the manga and got to this part in the storyline, he had written that Trunks was returning to the unseen timeline that he had already saved in order to tell them that he had killed the androids in his time. However, at this point it's possible that Toriyama came up with the idea of Cell regressing into his larval state because he couldn't fit into the time machine. And this would also help to serve as an explanation for why so many things were different in the main timeline as opposed to Trunks's. And on top of this would also give Kami a bigger reason to want to fuse with Piccolo. So it's possible that by the time that Akira Toriyama had written this down in the manga, he had completely forgotten that if Cell needed needed years to transform back into his imperfect form. This wouldn't make sense within the course of the timeline. However, considering the tight schedule that manga writers are on, it is highly possible that by the time Toriyama figured this out, if he actually did, he had to move on to the next issue to meet his deadlines. Whatever the reasoning is, in the end, this plot hole still exists, and of course, as I said before, time travel stories can be tricky. But in the end, we remember these stories not for their time travel mechanics, but the interesting dramas that unfold within them. Well, my name is Mike, and this has been another episode of Dragon Ball, Plot Holes and Inconsistencies. Tell me your own thoughts in the comments section, what you thought of this video, and what other topics you'd like me to talk about in the future. And of course, if you have any other questions, don't forget to check out our Ask FM, which will be in the description. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos in the future. And as I always say, stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future. And you better subscribe!